The wind screamed across the high plains, slicing through the frozen grass like a knife. Jack Callahan pulled his coat tighter, the wool collar rough against his jaw. Snow crunched under his boots, each step deliberate, heavy, like a man dragging chains you couldn't see. Shadow, his old hound, padded beside him, ears twitching at the crow's thin cry above. Jack's ranch crouched at the edge of Apache land, a lonely smear of fences and weather-beaten posts. The barn sagged under the weight of winter, and the cabin, barely more than logs stacked against the wind, looked as if it had been built to withstand more pain than warmth. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney, but it smelled of pine tar and loneliness. He rarely went into town now. People stared too long, or they didn't meet his eyes at all. They whispered about him in the mercantile, about the soldier who had walked away from the world and turned his back on everyone. Jack let them talk. Their words were lighter than the guilt he carried. Once he had been a rifleman with a steady hand and the best shot in his unit. He'd believed in orders, in the clean line between right and wrong.
But war was never clean. Not here, not when the land itself belonged to those who had bled for it long before he ever set foot on it. There was one memory that burned brighter and darker than the rest. A raid in the haze of gunpowder and fire. A woman standing in the crossfire, holding a baby close to her chest. His finger squeezed the trigger before his mind had caught up. The bullet found her heart. He saw her eyes, wide, startled, full of something that wasn't just fear. It was recognition. It was accusation. The baby's cry had echoed through the canyon like a curse, following him long after the smoke cleared. He left the army after that. Left the noise, the flags, the lies. He bought this ranch and built fences, hammering each post like a prayer for forgiveness. But the past didn't vanish. It lived in the scar on his trigger finger. It whispered in the wind. It shadowed every reflection in the icy creek. Shadow whined, breaking the spell of memory. The dog's nose hovered over the snow, tail stiff, muscles coiled. Jack crouched, scanning the ground. A dark smear marred the white. A thin line of blood, half frozen. His heart quickened.
Out here, blood meant one of two things. A predator had taken something that wasn't his, or trouble had come calling. Jack rose, slinging the Winchester from his shoulder. His fingers tightened on the stock, calloused knuckles whitening. The blood trail led toward the cottonwood grove at the far edge of his land. The trees were old, twisted with age, their branches heavy with snow. As Jack approached, the silence thickened. Shadow slowed, ears flattened, growling low in his throat. Jack took one step into the grove and froze. Something hung from a tree. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a hunter's trophy. It was a girl. Her arms were tied behind her back, her head slumped forward, black hair tangled with frost. A crude wooden sign was nailed above her head, the words burned deep and ugly. Savage, here to be taught. Jack's jaw tightened. He felt something crack inside, a memory, a wound he'd buried but never healed. He stepped closer, his breath loud in the stillness. The girl's chest rose, barely. Alive, for now. Shadow growled, circling, as if sensing the cruelty left behind. Jack's hand curled around the handle of his knife. He wasn't a man who went looking for trouble anymore.
Trouble was something he'd learned to walk away from, but some trouble found you anyway, whether you wanted it or not. He cut through the frozen rope at her wrists. The fibers resisted, as if clinging to her last breath. When she fell, he caught her, her body light, too light, like a bundle of sticks left to freeze. Jack glanced around. No riders, no tracks, only wind and snow covering what had happened here. Whoever did this was gone, leaving her like a warning nailed to the tree. Or a message. His gaze shifted to the sign again, those words, savage, like a lash across his own back. He ripped it down, the wood splintering under his grip. For a moment, he wanted to smash it against the trunk until nothing was left. Instead, he hurled it into the snow and turned his attention to the girl. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing dark, wild eyes. Even half frozen, they burned with something. Defiance, anger, or maybe fear sharpened into steel. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. "Easy," Jack muttered, his voice rough. "You're safe." She blinked once, slow, as if trying to believe him. Jack pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her narrow shoulders. She trembled, clutching the fabric, her fingers cracked and raw from the cold. Without another thought, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like carrying a memory with bones. The trek back to the ranch felt longer than any trail Jack had ever walked. The wind cut at his face, the snow tried to swallow his boots, but he kept going. He could feel her faint heartbeat, stubborn against his chest, as if her body refused to give in. Shadow trotted at his side, glancing back at the grove, as if expecting shadows to rise from the trees. By the time they reached the cabin, Jack's breath came ragged. He kicked the door open, carried her inside, and laid her on the cot by the fire. The place smelled of pine pitch and leather, but the scent of blood clung to her like smoke. He stoked the fire until flames roared, throwing warm light across the room. Her fingers twitched when the heat touched her skin. Jack knelt beside her, pulling a wool blanket over her frame. She whispered something, soft, broken. "Apache," she guessed. "Don't talk," he murmured. "Save your strength." She tried again, her voice cracking. "Naya," she breathed. Jack leaned closer. "What?" "My name. Naya." Jack nodded slowly. "All right, Naya. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you while I'm here." She looked at him, doubt lingering in her eyes, but something, an ember of trust, flickered there. Jack sat back, his gaze on the bruises across her face and hands. Rage coiled in his chest, hot and sharp. Whoever did this hadn't just tried to break her body, they'd tried to erase her spirit. He looked toward the window. The sun was sinking, staining the snow with a wash of blood-orange light. He knew they'd come looking. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Jack reached for his rifle. For years he had lived like a ghost, refusing to take sides. But as he looked at Naya, breathing because of him, he realized that quiet, lonely life was over. The cabin was warmer now, but the cold had already sunk into her bones. Jack knelt beside the cot, his hands clumsy but careful as he cleaned the blood from her face. The cloth in his palm turned crimson, and he had to force himself to look away, breathing slow, steady. Her skin was warm in patches, icy in others, and every time she flinched, he felt the sting like it was his own. Shadow lay near the fire, eyes fixed on her, ears flicking every time the wind groaned against the walls. The dog's low rumble was a warning, a promise. Nothing would come near her while he was breathing. Jack almost smiled at the thought. Almost. Her wounds weren't deep, but they were cruel. Welts from a whip across her shoulders, bruises blooming dark on her arms. He found rope burns at her wrists and winced, as if the sight burned his own skin. He reached for the tin of salve he kept for the horses. The smell of pine resin filled the air as he worked the ointment gently into her skin. She stirred when his fingers brushed a bruise near her collarbone, her breath catching. Her eyes opened, dark, unsteady, but burning with something that wasn't fear. Jack froze, caught by the weight of that gaze. It was the same look that had haunted him for 20 years. Only this time, she was still alive. "You're safe," he said quietly. His voice sounded rough, almost foreign to him. He wasn't used to talking. Her lips parted, but the words were too soft to catch. He leaned closer. "What is it?" "Naya," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but the word was clear enough to cut through him. Jack nodded. "Naya? All right." He dipped the cloth into warm water again and continued cleaning her wounds. She didn't resist. Her eyes followed him as if studying his face, searching for something he didn't know how to give. When he finished, he draped a thick wool blanket over her, tucking it under her chin like he remembered his mother doing when he was a boy. The fire crackled, casting shadows across the room. For a moment, it almost felt like the world outside didn't exist. Naya murmured something in Apache, a soft string of sounds that Jack didn't understand, but the tone of it made his chest tighten. It sounded like a prayer. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Shadow shifted closer to the cot, resting his head near her hand. She reached out weakly, her fingers brushing the dog's fur. Shadow didn't move, just closed his eyes as if to say, "You're one of us now." Jack stood and walked to the window. Snowflakes danced in the dying light outside. The land stretched empty and silent, but he could feel trouble like a weight in the air. Whoever had done this, whoever had left her to die, wouldn't just let it go. When he turned back, she was watching him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jack felt something shift inside him. Not just guilt, not just pity, something older, deeper, a connection he couldn't name. "You're safe here," he repeated, as much to himself as to her. Naya blinked, slow, deliberate, and then her eyes closed. Her breathing evened out, but her fingers stayed curled in Shadow's fur, as if she trusted the dog more than the man. Jack didn't mind. It was a start. He sat down by the fire, the Winchester leaning against his knee. The light flickered across his scarred hands. For years he'd lived like a ghost, but tonight, with the storm building outside and a girl named Naya breathing under his roof, Jack Callahan knew the past wasn't done with him. The storm rolled in with the night, a whispering wind that scraped against the cabin walls. Jack sat by the fire, sharpening the edge of his knife, eyes flicking now and then to the cot. Naya slept restlessly, her breath shallow, fingers curled tight into Shadow's fur. Every time the wind howled, Shadow's ears twitched, his growl low but steady. Jack had seen storms like this before, weather that hid more than it revealed. He set the knife aside and checked the Winchester leaning against the wall. He wiped the barrel clean, the habit coming back to him like muscle memory, like the days when the rifle was his only companion. He thought he'd left those days behind. Then he heard it, faint at first, like distant thunder, then clearer. Hooves. 3 horses, maybe 4, pounding through the snow. Jack's jaw tightened. He moved to the window, careful not to let the firelight silhouette him. Out beyond the corral, in the haze of moonlight and blowing snow, he saw them. 3 riders, their figures dark and sharp against the white. Colt Briggs was at the front, his coat flapping like the wings of some hungry crow. Jack opened the door and stepped onto the porch, Winchester in hand. The cold bit at his skin, but his stance was solid, unshaken. Shadow growled from inside, a warning low in his throat. "Evening, Callahan," Colt called out, his voice carrying too easily in the still air. "Heard tell you've been keeping company with some wild folks out here. Care to explain?" Jack didn't answer. He leveled the rifle, just enough that Colt could see the shine of the barrel in the moonlight. Colt laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You always were a stubborn bastard. We just want to have a look around, see if you got anything that don't belong to you."
"You set 1 foot past that fence," Jack said, his voice low, iron hard, "and you won't leave on your feet." The 2 men behind Colt shifted uneasily in their saddles, but Colt didn't flinch. He was young, arrogant, too sure of his name and his bloodline. "You threatening the sheriff's kin now?" Colt's grin was sharp and cold. "You know what they'll say in town? They'll say old Jack Callahan's gone mad, hiding savages like he's one of them." Jack's finger brushed the trigger, slow and deliberate. "Turn your horses around." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Colt spat into the snow, pulling his horse's reins. "This ain't over, old man. We'll be back, and next time we won't ask so nicely." Jack watched them ride off, their silhouettes swallowed by the storm. He lowered the rifle, but didn't relax. His heartbeat was a drum in his chest. Inside, Naya stirred, eyes opening as he closed the door behind him. "Who?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Trouble," Jack said. He crouched beside her, checking the bandages on her wrists. "But not tonight. You just rest." She studied him, eyes dark and unreadable. Jack wasn't sure what she saw in him. Protector, stranger, or ghost. Maybe all 3. Shadow settled by the door, his body tense, ears tuned to the silence outside. Jack sat back by the fire, rifle across his knees, and stared at the flames. Colt Briggs would return, and when he did, this cabin wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. By dawn, the storm had quieted, leaving the land under a heavy blanket of white. Jack had barely slept. He sat by the fire, sipping bitter coffee, watching the shadows play across the cabin walls. Shadow lay near the door, tail twitching in uneasy dreams. On the cot, Naya stirred. Her breathing, once ragged, had steadied through the night. When her eyes opened, they were sharp despite the exhaustion, like embers refusing to die out. She tried to sit up, but a groan escaped her lips as pain rippled through her body. Jack was at her side instantly, his rough hands supporting her shoulders. "You should stay down," he said, voice quiet but firm. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, as though measuring the truth of his words. Then she whispered something in Apache, soft but urgent. Jack shook his head. "I don't understand." She pointed weakly toward the small satchel tied to her torn belt, which lay on the floor beside the cot. Jack retrieved it and placed it in her lap. With trembling fingers, Naya pulled at the frayed leather straps and drew out a folded piece of hide. The edges were stained with soot, but the lines carved into it were clear, a crude map. Jack frowned. "What's this?" Her lips moved, forming words in broken English. "Sacred, caves." She traced a line on the map, her fingers stopping at a mark shaped like a circle. "Here, Father's land." Jack leaned closer. "Your father?" Her eyes darkened. "Red Hawk," she said, voice low but steady. "They kill him. Men from town, miners." Her jaw tightened, anger flickering beneath her exhaustion. "They want this land, not for cattle, for what's under it." Jack's eyes narrowed. He'd heard rumors about rich veins of silver hidden in the hills, whispers passed around in saloons and trading posts. He never believed them. "The miners," he muttered. "They're after more than just soil." Naya nodded. Her fingers curled around the map like it was her last lifeline. "This is all left of my people's home. They burn the rest." Jack sat back, silent for a moment. He stared at the fire, the flames curling like memories. He had known greed could turn men into monsters. He'd seen it in war, in raids that had left nothing but smoke and screams behind. Now it was here, crawling closer to his door. "You were there," he said slowly, looking back at her, "when they killed your father." Her gaze locked on his, and for a moment he saw the girl beneath the scars, the daughter of a man who had tried to protect his people and paid with his life. "I saw," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but her eyes never wavered. "They laughed. They said no one would remember him." Something twisted in Jack's gut. He knew what it was like to be haunted by a single moment, a single mistake that clung to you like blood on your hands. He reached for the folded hide, his fingers brushing hers. "Then they were wrong," he said, "because I remember now." Naya studied him as though trying to read the truth in his face.
Finally, she let out a slow breath, shoulders sagging. "Rest," Jack said, tucking the blanket tighter around her. "You'll need your strength. They're not done coming for you." Naya's hand trembled as she reached out, lightly touching his wrist. "You help? Because of guilt?" she asked softly. Jack froze. For a heartbeat, the cabin felt too small, too quiet. His eyes dropped to the scar on his trigger finger. "Maybe," he admitted, voice rough. "Or maybe because I'm tired of watching good people get buried by the bad ones." The fire burned low, its glow soft against the rough walls. Outside, the snow reflected the moonlight, turning the land into a pale, silent desert. Jack sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching for any sign of movement. Shadow slept with one ear perked, a silent sentinel. Behind him, Naya shifted on the cot. She had more color in her face now, but her eyes still carried the weight of someone who had seen too much darkness. Jack turned to check on her, the way a man might look at something fragile he wasn't sure how to fix. "Why?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Why what?" Jack set the rifle aside and moved closer. "Why save me?" Her dark eyes locked on his. "You don't know me. People here, they hate us." Jack hesitated. He wasn't a man who liked to talk about himself. Words always felt heavier than bullets. But there was something in her voice, accusation mixed with curiosity, that made him answer. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he said, his tone low, almost flat. "I used to wear a uniform, did what I was told, thought I was on the right side. Then one day, I pulled the trigger and saw who I really hit. A woman. Apache." He stopped, the memory clawing at him like broken glass. Naya didn't speak. She just watched him, her face unreadable. "She had a baby," Jack continued. "I can still hear the cry. I walked away after that. Left the army, the town, all of it. Been living out here trying to forget, but I never could." His hands clenched, the scar on his trigger finger white against the firelight. "When I saw you on that tree, I saw her, and I knew if I walked away again, I'd be just as dead inside as she is." For a long moment, Naya was silent. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them. Then, softly, she said, "Maybe saving me is the way you face her spirit." Jack looked at her, something sharp and unspoken catching in his chest. "Maybe," he said, though he wasn't sure if redemption was something a man like him could earn. Shadow padded over to Naya's side, resting his muzzle near her hand. She smiled faintly, the first sign of softness he'd seen in her. Her fingers stroked the dog's fur, slow and gentle. "Your dog, he trusts me," she murmured. "Shadow doesn't trust easy," Jack said. "Guess he's smarter than I am." For the first time, a small laugh slipped from Naya's lips, quiet and fleeting, but real. It startled Jack more than any gunshot. She leaned back, eyes heavy but clear. "You're not like them," she whispered. Jack didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure who them meant, the soldiers, the townsfolk, or the men like Colt Briggs who treated Apache lives like currency. "Maybe not," he said finally, "but I'm no hero either." Naya's gaze softened. Sometimes being hero is just not turning away. Jack stared at her, the words sinking deeper than she knew. Maybe she was right. Maybe the first step wasn't about being a hero, but about standing where you were needed, even when it burned. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound, distant hoofbeats. Jack's eyes narrowed. He reached for his rifle and moved toward the window, the fragile warmth between them replaced by the cold certainty that trouble was coming. By midday, the snow had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than the storm itself. Jack walked the perimeter of the ranch, boots crunching over ice, Shadow trotting behind him. He checked the fence lines, half of them buried under drifts, the rest leaning like tired old bones. Something gnawed at him, a gut-deep warning that today wouldn't pass quietly. When he returned to the cabin, Naya was sitting upright for the first time. Wrapped in a thick blanket, she stared at the flames, her profile sharp against the glow. She looked stronger, but her eyes were restless, like she could still hear the men who had left her to die. "You should lie back," Jack said, stepping inside. "I can't," Naya murmured, "not when they're coming." Jack's jaw tightened. He hadn't told her about Colt's visit, but she knew. People who'd been hunted always knew when danger was on the wind. The sound came then, just as it had the night before, hooves pounding, but this time more of them. Jack grabbed the Winchester from the wall and looked out the window. 6 riders cut across the frozen land, their shapes blurred by the pale sun. Colt Briggs rode at the front, his hat low, his grin sharp as a blade. "Stay here," Jack told Naya. "Don't open that door for anyone but me." He stepped outside, the rifle cradled in his arms. Shadow growled beside him, hackles raised. The riders slowed near the fence, their horses snorting steam into the cold air. "Well, well," Colt called out, voice slick with mockery. "Thought I'd give you another chance to come clean, Callahan. Town's been talking. Word is you're hiding a savage girl in that shack of yours." Jack didn't answer. He leveled the rifle, the barrel catching a glint of sunlight. "You think you can stand against all of us?" Colt smirked, gesturing to the 5 men behind him. "We're not here to play games. We're here for what's ours." Jack's voice was low, steady as a rock slide. "She's not yours, and this land, it's not yours either. You take one more step, I'll show you the line you don't cross." Colt's smile faltered, but only for a second. He turned in his saddle, laughing loud enough for his men to hear. "You hear that? Old Jack Callahan thinks he's still a soldier. Thinks he can scare us with a gun and a broken-down fence." As if to prove his point, one of the men lit a torch and hurled it at the fence. Flames hissed and licked up the wood, smoke curling black against the pale sky. Shadow barked furiously. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger, but he stopped himself. Not yet. Not unless he had no choice. "Last chance, old man," Colt said. "Hand over the girl, or we come through that door, and no one walks away clean." Jack's eyes burned cold. "You want her. You come for her. But I promise you this. Every man who crosses that fence leaves with less than he came with." For a moment, the standoff was so sharp it could cut. Then Colt's grin returned. He tipped his hat mockingly and tugged his reins.
"We'll be back," he said, "and next time we'll bring more fire." Jack watched them ride off, their laughter echoing like crows in the dead of winter.
He didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Inside, Naya's eyes met his as he closed the door. She had seen the smoke from the torch. "They won't stop," she said softly. "No," Jack agreed, voice flat. "But neither will I." That night, the flames from the burned fence still smoldered, curling smoke into the icy air. Jack stood over the blackened posts, the smell of charred wood clinging to his coat. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. For years, he'd avoided conflict, convinced that silence and solitude were the only penance for what he'd done. But Colt Briggs had brought the fight to his door, and this time there was no running. Inside the cabin, Naya sat quietly by the fire, her eyes following Jack's every move. He'd been pacing since sunset, as though the walls of the ranch had suddenly become too small for the storm inside him. "They will come again," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was steady now, stripped of fear. "Yeah," Jack replied, tossing another log into the fire. Sparks leapt like angry spirits. "They'll come harder. More men, more fire." "You could give me to them," Naya said softly. "They want me, not you." Jack stopped, turning sharply to face her. The firelight carved hard lines into his face. "That's not happening, not while I'm breathing." Her gaze held his, dark and unwavering. "Why risk your life for me?" He hesitated. Words didn't come easy, not when the truth cut so close. "Because once I didn't save someone I should have, and I've been paying for it every damn day since." He grabbed a coil of rope from the shelf, his movements rough and determined. "I'm not making that mistake twice." Jack spent the next hour preparing the ranch like a man who knew death was coming. He checked the rifle, polished the barrel, counted every bullet left in the box. Shadow lay by the door, watching him with solemn eyes, as if the dog understood the weight of what was about to happen. Naya tried to rise from the cot, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. "Teach me," she said suddenly. Jack turned, surprised. "Teach you what?" "To fight," she answered. Her jaw was set, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from determination. "If they come for me, I won't be helpless again." For a long moment, Jack just stared at her. There was fire in her eyes, something he hadn't seen in years, something that reminded him of the warrior spirit he'd once buried. Finally, he handed her the smaller of his two revolvers. "It's not about pulling the trigger," he said, showing her how to hold the weapon. "It's about knowing when not to." She nodded, her fingers wrapping awkwardly around the grip. After a few minutes, Jack took the gun back and set it aside. "You'll have to trust me. If things get bad, I need you to get out. There's an old trail behind the barn that leads to the canyon. Shadow knows it. Follow him." Naya shook her head. "I won't leave you." "Don't be stubborn," he said. But there was something like respect in his voice. When the preparations were done, Jack sat by the fire, the Winchester across his knees. His hands moved with slow, deliberate care as he cleaned the rifle, the rhythm almost ritualistic. The firelight danced over his face, catching the glint of old scars and new resolve. Shadow rested his head on Jack's boot, as if grounding him. Naya watched from the cot, her eyes following every movement. "You're not the man they say you are." Jack didn't look up. "Maybe not," he murmured, "but tomorrow we'll find out." The night came down like iron, cold and merciless. Jack stood on the porch of his cabin, Winchester cradled in his arms, every muscle wired tight. Out beyond the fence, the horizon shimmered with lantern light and moving shadows. Colt Briggs and his gang were coming. Inside, Naya sat by the fire, clutching the small revolver Jack had given her. Her hands shook, not from weakness, but from the storm of fear and defiance twisting inside her. Shadow paced near the door, fur bristling, a low growl rolling from his throat. Jack's preparations were finished. Barrels of water stacked near the barn to douse fire. Narrow shooting slits cut through the walls, and a crude line of snares hidden under the snow. He wasn't expecting to win, but he meant to make every bullet count. The first shot cracked the silence, splintering the night. A warning. Jack answered with a shot of his own, the sound echoing off the frozen hills. He aimed not to kill, but to cripple, firing into the legs of Colt's lead horse. The animal screamed and reared, throwing its rider into the snow. Chaos rippled through the gang. "Callahan!" Colt's voice cut through the night, dripping with rage. "You can't hide behind those walls forever. Hand over the girl, and maybe we'll let you live." Jack's reply was a thunderclap of gunfire, the bullet tearing through the brim of Colt's hat. "Step closer," Jack growled, "and you'll see how much life I've got left in me." The gang spread out, circling the ranch. One of them hurled a torch over the fence, flames licking at the dry wood. Jack rolled a barrel of water forward, dousing the fire before it could spread. His hands moved with grim precision, as if every action was etched into muscle memory from long-forgotten battlefields. Through the crack of the window, Naya fired once, the shot wild, but enough to scare a rider back. She bit her lip hard, determined not to freeze in fear. Shadow barked sharply, warning Jack of movement at the rear. Jack spun, catching a man trying to slip through the side gate, and dropped him with a clean shot to the knee. The air stank of gunpowder and burning wood. Jack's breath came hard, his eyes scanning the shifting shadows. He could feel the noose tightening. Colt's men weren't retreating. They were just waiting for the right moment to strike harder. Jack wiped the blood from a shallow graze on his arm and reloaded. He wasn't going to last much longer. Something had to give. The gunfire had slowed, replaced by the hollow creak of saddles and the crunch of boots in snow. Colt's gang had regrouped, their voices low but laced with fury. Jack knew they were preparing for another push, and this time they wouldn't be cautious. He stepped back into the cabin, breath steaming in the cold air. Naya's eyes shot up to meet his, dark and resolute. "We can't stay," she said, her voice thin but fierce. Jack nodded. "You're right. They'll set this place on fire if they have to. You take Shadow and follow the back trail. It'll lead you to the canyon. Don't stop." "I won't leave you," she said, her jaw trembling with anger more than fear. "You will," Jack said, his tone final. "This isn't your fight to finish. It's mine." He pressed a small hunting knife into her palm. "If anyone comes near you, use this. Shadow will lead you out." For a heartbeat, Naya's lips quivered, as though she wanted to argue. But something in Jack's eyes, an unspoken plea, made her nod. Shadow whined, sensing the change, but trotted to her side, ready to guide. Jack opened the rear door, the night wind rushing in like a cold knife. "Go," he whispered. Naya glanced back once, her eyes catching the firelight, then slipped into the shadows with Shadow close on her heels. Jack returned to the front, firing 2 quick shots at the riders advancing through the smoke. He moved with a soldier's instinct, rolling behind the water barrels, snapping shots that clipped the ground near Colt's boots. One of the riders cursed as Jack's bullet shattered the rifle in his hands. "Find the girl!" Colt roared. "She can't get far." Jack's chest tightened. He'd bought Naya minutes, maybe less. He needed to pull Colt's focus. Jack grabbed an old lantern from the porch, smashed it against a post, and hurled the burning oil toward the gang.
Flames erupted in a sudden blaze, scattering horses and forcing the men back. Colt swore, his face twisted with rage. "Callahan, you think you can bleed me out from here? I'll gut you first." Jack slipped out the side door, blood dripping from a cut on his temple.
He had one thought: draw Colt away, give Naya more time. He sprinted toward the ridge, rifle in hand, boots pounding through the snow. Behind him, Colt's voice rang out, "After him!" The chase began, men and horses cutting across the frozen ground, the smell of fire fading behind them. The ridge loomed ahead, jagged and dark against the pale winter moon. Jack's boots slipped on the icy rocks, his breath burning in his lungs. Behind him, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Colt Briggs, relentless as a wolf, leading 2 of his best men. Jack stopped at the edge of the cliff. Below, the canyon yawned, its depths hidden by swirling mist. There was no more running. He turned, Winchester raised, his silhouette stark against the open sky. Colt reined in his horse, a savage grin curling on his lips. "End of the line, Callahan," he drawled. "Hand over the girl's trail map, and maybe I'll let you crawl back to your ranch." Jack didn't answer. He sighted down the rifle and fired, the shot splintering the rock just inches from Colt's boot. The horse reared, and Colt tumbled to the ground, cursing. "You never were as tough as they said," Colt spat, drawing his revolver. "Just a washed-up soldier hiding behind ghosts." Jack dropped his rifle deliberately, letting it clatter to the ground. He stepped forward, fists clenched. "No ghosts, Briggs. Just a man tired of watching your kind burn the world." Colt's grin faltered as Jack closed the distance. The fight was brutal and close, fist against fist, the clash of bodies against frozen earth. Colt landed a hard blow to Jack's ribs, but Jack's response was a knee to Colt's gut, knocking the wind out of him. One of Colt's men tried to interfere, but Jack grabbed a loose rock and hurled it, striking the man squarely in the temple. He dropped, dazed and groaning. Colt stumbled, blood dripping from his lip. Jack forced him back, step by step, until Colt's boots scraped the cliff's edge. The wind howled between them, carrying the faint sound of distant hoofbeats. Naya and Shadow were still moving, still alive. Colt's hand twitched toward his gun, but Jack slammed a punch across his jaw, sending him sprawling near the edge. Colt froze, half over the precipice, his fingers clawing at the dirt. Jack stood over him, breathing hard, his face shadowed with both fury and restraint. "Go ahead," Colt hissed, his voice trembling. "Do it. You don't have the guts." Jack's jaw tightened. He grabbed Colt by the collar and hauled him back from the cliff. "I don't need to kill you," Jack said, voice cold as the wind. "Living with your shame is punishment enough." The silence that followed was broken only by Colt's ragged breathing and the whisper of wind through the canyon. Jack stood tall, his chest heaving, every muscle taut from the fight. Colt staggered to his feet, fury burning in his eyes. But before either man could make another move, a sound rose from beyond the ridge. It started as a low hum, then grew into a haunting call, a war horn, deep and resonant, echoing across the plains. Colt froze. Even Jack felt a shiver crawl down his spine. From the snow-dusted trees to the east, shadows emerged, riders on horseback, their silhouettes sharp against the pale moonlight. The Apache had arrived. The first warrior crested the ridge, his face painted in the traditional red and white streaks of battle. Behind him came others, their presence silent but commanding, like a wall of history and vengeance rolling in on hooves.
The torches they carried flickered in the dark, their flames reflecting off weapons and determined eyes. Colt's men panicked. One dropped his gun outright, whispering curses under his breath. "We didn't sign up for this, Colt," the man muttered, fear cracking his voice. Colt snarled, but even he took a step back. Damn it, where the hell did they come from? Jack lowered his stance slightly, but didn't reach for his rifle. His eyes met those of the leading Apache warrior. The man's gaze was sharp, assessing, but not hostile, not toward Jack. Then Naya appeared, riding double behind a young Apache scout. Shadow trotted at their heels, his coat dusted with snow. She slid off the horse, eyes locking with Jack's. There was relief in her face, but also something fiercer, pride. "She's safe," Jack said, his voice rough with exhaustion. The leading warrior rode forward, speaking in Apache. Naya answered, her tone clear and strong. She turned to Jack, translating softly. "They saw what you did. They know you're not with him." Her chin jerked toward Colt. The warrior dismounted, stepping close to Colt, who instinctively reached for his gun. But Jack was faster. With one swift motion, Jack kicked Colt's revolver from his hand, sending it skittering across the ground. The Apache warrior's voice was deep and steady as he spoke again. Naya translated. "He says men like him," she pointed at Colt, "have spilled enough blood on this land. Tonight, it ends." Colt swallowed hard. For the first time, the swagger in his eyes faltered. The Apache warriors closed in, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold air. Colt and his remaining men were quickly surrounded, stripped of their weapons with practiced efficiency. Jack stepped back, letting the moment belong to Naya and her people. He had done his part. Now, this land would speak for itself. Naya walked forward, her posture proud despite the bruises still marring her skin. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice steady. Jack couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear in her tone. She was telling them what he had done, how he had stood against Colt to save her life. The elder warrior dismounted from his horse. His hair was long, streaked with gray, his face weathered by sun and time. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much blood spilled on sacred ground. He looked Jack over with eyes like burning coals, sharp and searching. For a tense moment, no one spoke. Jack, still breathing hard, wiped the blood from his lip and met the elder's gaze. He didn't try to explain or defend himself. Words would never erase what he'd done years ago. He simply stood there, shoulders square, ready for whatever judgment came. The elder raised a hand and said something low to Naya. She translated softly. "He says he knows your face. He knows the old stories, but he also sees what you've done tonight. Blood debts can be heavy, but sometimes they can be paid by courage." Jack's throat tightened. He didn't deserve forgiveness, not from them, not from anyone. But he didn't look away. The elder stepped closer, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he placed a small object in Jack's hand. A braided leather necklace adorned with a single white eagle feather. The feather glowed faintly in the torchlight, a symbol of peace and redemption. Naya whispered, "It means they see you as an ally, a friend. Someone who's walked through darkness and come back." Jack stared at the necklace for a long moment, then slowly placed it over his head. It felt heavier than any medal or honor he'd ever received. His chest rose and fell with something like relief, something like release. For the first time in years, Jack felt the chains of his past loosen. The night was silent, save for the restless shifting of horses and the crackle of the dying torches. Colt Briggs knelt in the snow, his hands bound with rawhide, his face streaked with blood and humiliation. The arrogance that had fueled him was gone, replaced by a dull, simmering hatred. His men, stripped of weapons, stood in a trembling line behind him. The Apache warriors formed a circle, their presence like a wall of stone and memory. The elder stepped forward, speaking in a low, steady tone. Naya translated, her voice cutting through the cold air. He says, "This land remembers. The blood of Red Hawk, my father, still cries out from the earth. He says the men who desecrated the graves will answer for it." Colt sneered, but his eyes darted nervously from face to face. "You think anyone will believe you? The law's on my side," he spat. Jack stepped forward then, his shadow long and dark under the moonlight. "The law," he said, voice rough but unwavering, "has nothing to do with what's right. And tonight, right is standing here." Jack pulled a bundle from his coat, a stained, crumpled letter, the one Naya had carried, proof of Colt's treachery. He tossed it into the snow in front of Colt. "Your lies end here," Jack growled. The elder warrior bent down, picked up the letter, and showed it to his men. Murmurs rippled through the circle. The truth, once hidden, was now carved into the night for all to see. Colt lunged as if to break free, but two warriors shoved him back to his knees. His defiance shattered when the elder raised a spear and drove it into the snow inches from his chest. It wasn't a killing strike, it was judgment. Colt froze, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Naya stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed both Colt and his men. "This is the last time you bring fire to this land. If you return, the earth itself will rise against you." Jack looked at her, a flicker of pride crossing his worn face. She wasn't the frightened girl tied to a tree anymore. She was Red Hawk's daughter. The warriors dragged Colt and his men away, disappearing into the shadows of the plains. As the last torch faded, Jack stood beside Naya and Shadow, feeling, for the first time in decades, the weight of silence without guilt. "It's over," he said softly, his breath clouding in the cold. The ranch bore the scars of the battle. The fence along the southern edge was half burned, blackened posts leaning like weary soldiers. Bullet holes peppered the cabin walls, and the snow around the barn was still stained with patches of ash and dried blood. But Jack Callahan didn't see ruin anymore. He saw a beginning. He rose early now, not because nightmares chased him, but because the morning held purpose. Shadow, limping slightly from an old wound, followed close behind as Jack carried new fence posts across the frozen ground. His breath came in steady clouds, the rhythm of rebuilding stronger than any silence that had haunted him before. Naya arrived just after sunrise, her dark hair braided neatly, her face calm yet full of fire. She dismounted from her horse with ease, carrying a bundle of seeds and herbs wrapped in cloth.
"Your soil is tired," she said, kneeling by the barren patch near the barn. "It needs something living to grow again." Jack crouched beside her, watching as she worked the earth with bare hands. There was something healing in her quiet determination, as though she was planting more than seeds. She was planting hope. "Never thought I'd see the day someone wanted to grow flowers on this land," Jack muttered, though there was a hint of a smile beneath his beard. "Not just flowers," Naya said softly. "Food, life. You've given me a chance to live. I'll return that gift." Jack felt a strange warmth spread in his chest. For years, this ranch had been nothing but a place to hide, a prison built of guilt and memory. Now, with Naya kneeling in the soil, it felt like a home. Over the days that followed, the ranch began to change. The barn, once dark and silent, filled with the sounds of tools being sharpened, the smell of fresh-cut wood, and the quiet laughter of shared work. A few young Apache men came to help, carrying supplies and teaching Jack how to use native plants for healing and soil care.
They were cautious at first, but when they saw the feathered necklace around Jack's neck, their eyes softened. Jack returned the gesture in his own way. He began taking baskets of cured meat, leather, and supplies to the edge of Apache land, leaving them for Naya's people. He didn't say much, but the act spoke for him. In town, rumors spread. Whispers that Jack Callahan wasn't the recluse they'd thought he was. Some folks avoided him still, but others nodded when they passed him on the road. They'd seen Colt Briggs hauled into town in chains, and they knew something had changed out on Callahan's ranch. One afternoon, Naya found Jack by the corral, repairing a gate splintered during the fight. She handed him a small cloth pouch filled with beads. "For your horse," she said. "My mother made these long ago. She said beads hold memory, like stones in water." Jack looked down at the gift, his hands rough and scarred as they traced the delicate patterns. "Thank you," he said quietly. He tied the beads to the saddle horn of his oldest mare, the colors catching the light like pieces of sunrise. They didn't speak much that day. Words felt unnecessary.
Jack worked, Naya planted, and Shadow slept by the fire. As evening came, the ranch seemed to hum with a quiet life Jack hadn't felt in decades. For the first time, Jack realized he wasn't living alone anymore, not truly. He had a friend, an ally, maybe even a new family of sorts. The weight of the past wasn't gone, but it was lighter now, shared between hands willing to carry it. The sky blazed with the colors of sunset, deep gold, burning orange, and streaks of violet that stretched across the horizon. Jack Callahan stood on the hill above his ranch, a quiet silhouette against the dying light. Shadow lay beside him, the old hound's head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but always alert. In his hand, Jack held the feathered necklace the Apache elder had given him. It felt warm, despite the cold, the leather soft against his palm. He turned it over slowly, the white eagle feather catching the last rays of sunlight. It wasn't just a token of forgiveness, it was a promise. A reminder that even the heaviest sins could be faced if a man had the courage to stand and make it right. Below the hill, the ranch looked alive again.
The fences were straight, the barn repaired, and rows of tilled earth marked the start of a garden where once only weeds and dust grew. Smoke curled from the chimney of the cabin, not thin and cold as before, but steady and welcoming. He could almost hear Naya's laughter from there, soft and steady, like wind through the cottonwoods. She came riding up the trail just then, her horse moving with easy grace. Naya's hair, unbound from its braid, shimmered in the sunset light. She carried something wrapped in deerskin. "For you," she said, handing it to him as she dismounted. Jack unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a necklace of her own making. Apache beads in shades of red, turquoise, and ivory. "It's for the horse," she said, "but it's also for you, so you remember that you're not alone anymore." Jack's throat tightened. He tied the necklace onto his mare's saddle horn, then turned to Naya. "You didn't have to do this." Naya smiled, the expression both kind and fierce. "Neither did you, but you saved me anyway." The words lingered between them. Jack glanced toward the horizon where the land of the Apache stretched wide and endless. "I didn't save you," he said finally.
"You saved me. You made me face the man I didn't want to see in the mirror." Naya tilted her head, studying him. "And what do you see now?" Jack looked out at the rolling plains, the sky melting into night. "A man still learning how to live," he said, voice low, "but one who's done running." They stood there for a long time, neither speaking. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of unspoken truths and quiet understanding. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching at the distant sound of coyotes calling across the plain. The air was cold, but Jack felt warmth in his chest, a steady glow that had nothing to do with the fire in the cabin. It was the warmth of knowing he'd found something worth fighting for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack turned to Naya. "Some wounds," he said slowly, "don't heal by hiding. They heal when we face them with all we've got." Naya nodded, her dark eyes shining. "Then you're healing, Jack Callahan." He smiled, an expression that felt strange and new on his face, and nodded. "Maybe we both are." She swung back onto her horse, glancing down at him. "Tomorrow I'll bring seeds. We'll plant together." Jack raised a hand in farewell as she rode back toward the Apache lands. He watched her silhouette fade into the twilight until only the sound of hooves remained, then silence. Shadow nudged his hand, breaking his reverie. Jack knelt beside the old hound, scratching behind his ears. "Come on, old boy," he murmured. "Let's go home." He turned back toward the cabin, the feathered necklace resting against his chest, the warmth of the fire waiting to welcome them both. The past wasn't gone, but for the first time it no longer defined him. Ahead there was only the open land, the promise of spring, and the quiet truth that life, like the earth, could heal if given a chance. Follow true Wild West stories, where every tale is a scar of the wind, a nostalgic ballad of lone souls finding redemption across the dusty frontier. Subscribe now and let these heartfelt stories stir your memories, your spirit, and the timeless echoes of the West.